Oh, good afternoon, everybody. This is the Passball Show, brought to you by JohnPLE.com. Today's the 27th day of December, as we are a couple days away from the end of 2017. And, you know, I was kind of thinking about what I wanted to start the show with today. And it's kind of funny. Sometimes you end up starting a show and it goes in a little bit of a different direction. And you're like, you know what? Maybe I'm going to start with something a little bit different. A lot of people are down on themselves, and I spoke last week about the importance of being close to family, being close to loved ones, but most importantly, just making it known that you're there. You're there in spirit, you're there in voice, and you care. And a lot of people look back at the year of 2017, and I find it kind of a repetitive thing. It seems like there's a lot of people felt like that about 2016. Others felt about that in 2015. And in some cases, it's the same people that year after year are always talking about how, hey, new year, new me. Or, I can't wait for this year to be over. It's such a bad year. But I think the key for really anybody is to have a plan. And I don't think there is enough emphasis put on having a plan to make a particular year better for you. It's not the year that was bad. Maybe it's a series of unfortunate events. Like, remember, 2016 was about the amount of musicians and people in the public eye that passed away and died in some cases at early ages. So it was the year, please go away. You know, next year will be better because there'll be many more people in the spotlight that hopefully will live through the year. And we thought of 2016 as the year where we lost so many different people, particularly in the music industry. My only question for anybody that's having a hard time grasping year after year, hey, this year's been terrible. Listen, we all go through bad moments. There isn't a person out there that isn't understanding over the fact that, you know what? You can have a bad moment. But when you start to allow yourself to believe that it was an entire year, there's really no positivity that could come out of it. Sure, we can look at January 1st of whatever the given new year is and look at all the opportunity that exists. You say, hey, everything that happened in years past is in the past. And maybe you can, and in some cases, some people are able to use it as motivation for the future and to do better and to maybe make the incoming year better than the year prior. But I'm one that, you know, is not a big fan of hearing new year, new me. Or I can't wait for this year to be over. As if all of a sudden on January 1st, 2018, all of everybody's problems are just going to be gone. And it's a clean slate. You know what? That clean slate, in all honesty, should be created at a time of your choice. Don't wait for a new year to do that. I wish everybody the best of the new year, but not just the day, but for many days. And we all deserve that. But we all also have to realize the control that we have over things. And I've always said, for what is out of my control is in the control of the Lord. And as I'm able to say that, I feel comfort in it. Everything that happens that could be unfortunate or could happen in a certain way where maybe I wasn't really expecting it, or I had no say or no determining factor in what happened to me as it impacts me, I put in the hands of the Lord. And once I do that, I feel much better. Because what's out of your control, and you know what, for those that don't, you know, believe in God, which, you know what, my job isn't to make people believe in God, but for those that don't, the simple statement of what is within your control, how much can you really control it? So you have the ability, you're the general of your own brain, right? You make decisions that impact you in a positive way and a negative way. But when things happen to you, whether it's death in a family, whether it's a bad break, somebody did something that impacts you tremendously. If it's out of your hands, even for the atheist should understand that what's out of one's control is something that they can't do anything about. It's out of your control. If their choice is, or your choice is not to put it in God's hands, well, it is truthfully in hands that are beyond your grips. As I continue to preach and speak, I always look at every occurrence as an opportunity. And I have the opportunity to positively or negatively impact a situation. So once, and I hate to sound kind of just generic with this, but once I've put all my positive energy and everything that I can do in a way to make something turn out the best way possible, then I choose to put my hands in God after that. And for those, once again, that don't believe in God, it has to be in the hands of somebody that's not you, because you don't have control over it anymore. Let me throw out the phone number, 732-364-3598. And once again, 732-364-3598 will get you up here. Anything in regards to baseball, sports, and unifying America. This is the Pass Ball Show, brought to you by JohnPLE.com. A couple things I wanted to talk about today, and I did get some good dialogue yesterday talking about amphetamines and making a comparison to steroids. A lot of people were not, some people were in agreement. Others were a little bit incensed because they look at the two things as being completely different. So what did I do? I went to the books and I started reading, and I started coming up with more research to back the points up that I made yesterday. But we're going to start out by talking about a team that I've spent a lot of time talking about from the early days of my show. And the early days of my show go back to, I believe it's October of 2011. And I had just graduated broadcasting school, and I couldn't wait to do a show on my own. I'd done a couple different shows where I was either a co-host or a frequent host or a guest host, and realized that I wanted to do something on my own. So I started to do a baseball show that I called what is still now known as the Pass Ball Show. And what I spoke about during the time, to me, it was a forum in my own way for Mets fans. I'm a fan of the New York Mets. Of course, I've grown over the years and will still always be a Mets fan, regardless of what it is that I say and do. But my show has changed. We started talking about baseball in general and baseball history and incorporating all the different guests that we have into the show. And, it's kind of grown from there. So I wouldn't say my show is a Mets show. I also wouldn't say that my show is a baseball show. It's grown to what it is right now. It's baseball, sports, and unifying America. But so over the last several years, of course, I haven't spent as much time talking about the New York Mets. And Mark Carrig will hopefully join the show within the next couple days, if not sometime next week. But I would say, Mark Carrig from Newsday probably is the closest now to a reporter that really has his hands legitimately into what's going on in the organization. He's called out the owners. If there is any news that resembles anything that's a rumor or any discussion involving a potential Mets acquisition, he knows right off the bat whether it's a yes or no situation. So, to make a long story short, and I know I have a hard time doing that, Sandy Alderson, as the Mets general manager and president, is in a little bit of a tough situation. Because of what's being reported, it seems as if the owners, Fred and his son, Jeff Wilpon, have a little bit of an issue in regards to cash. I don't know if it's that they're not turning enough of a profit, but the bottom line is they've put a clamp or almost a stop on the willingness or their approval for the general manager to be able to spend the money that's necessary to put the right players in place for the Mets to be not only competitive, but up there with the upper echelon of teams in which they were in 2015 and 2016. Last year, 2017, was obviously a disappointing season, but it was a disappointing season on many fronts. There was underachievement. There was the Nationals getting off to a pretty good start. There was injury after injury after injury. And it just seemed like it was the perfect storm for one of those seasons that you'd want to just forget. Now, bouncing back off of that, you can look at the many positives. The Mets have a very good starting rotation of solid young pitchers, which starts with Noah Syndergaard and then it's followed by Jacob deGrom. And there's enough key pieces on this team that with a couple small tweaks, I think the Mets can get themselves at the very least into the discussion for a potential wild card spot. And I think with the right tweaks, they could increase the expectations a little bit higher, where maybe they could compete for a division title. Well, it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. But it also seems like a lot of people with frustration, and listen, we all get frustrated as fans. We all have the right to be upset, especially if we have expectations for our own team that we root for, and things don't work the way that we expect them to. The Mets won 70 games last year, lost 92. I can't imagine too many Mets fans being happy with what they saw over the course of the 2017 season. So, I get the frustration, but what I don't get is a misdirection of their frustration. And I've been saying this for years. The Mets could win a World Series championship, or many teams in baseball that are considered in the top half of the league could win a World Series with a robot manager. They could win a World Series with somebody that's probably not even a very good manager. And I'm not going to unleash an assault on managers that have won World Series that one may say they're not the greatest of managers. Because you know what? Once you win a World Series, good for you. You know, Ned Yost won a World Series. A.J. Hinch won a World Series. John Farrell won a World Series. There's a lot of managers that you wouldn't think amongst the best of all time. Dick Howser, Joe Altobelli with the Baltimore Orioles. You know, going back further, Chuck Tanner, Alvin Dark. There were some managers that you would never say, all right, you know what, the guy belongs in the Hall of Fame, but plenty of managers that were average to below average have won World Series championships before. So the point that I've been making over the last several years is that Terry Collins was not the reason that the New York Mets didn't win a World Series. They could have won a World Series with him, and it wouldn't have been in spite of him. He was an average manager, maybe in some cases a below average manager. So number one, we've misidentified the value of a major league manager, which by the way has changed over the last 5 to 10 years. And if you've heard me rant on this show before, I've spoken about how a manager in Major League Baseball is only as good as the players that are on the field, is only as good as the front office and ownership and the scouts and the farm system that is above them. And in the end, they're not going to be able to win it nor lose it within their own performance. So manager in Major League Baseball is overrated. It's the most overrated head coaching position that exists in all of sports. Yet we still want to blame the manager. The manager of the New York Yankees, Joe Girardi. did he really cost the team a chance at the World Series? Or, if you were a Joe Girardi supporter, you may say that the Yankees got as far as they did simply because of Joe Girardi. The bottom line is you could say that about almost any manager. You could say the negative and then the positive, but we're still talking about the same person, which is further proof that a manager in Major League Baseball is the most overrated head coaching position in all of professional sports. So now, as we're talking about the Mets here, moving forward or moving up the hierarchy, you have the general manager. And Sandy Alderson is the general manager and the president of baseball operations for the New York Mets. You might want to say that he has full autonomy. He doesn't. I think he has the right to suggest a trade that could, in turn, bring the Mets a player that's going to be on a large contract. He has the potential to propose or negotiate with a free agent over the terms of a prospective contract. But after that, his hands are tied. He has the right in the position that he's in to recommend said free agent signing or said trade that involves the transfer of money to ownership, which is Fred and Jeff Wilpon, and they could either say yes or say no. Now, the reports that you're hearing are right now the Mets only have financially about $10 million to spend in regards to payroll for next season. That's not going to get you very much. So if that's not going to get you very much, then how is the blame being thrown in the face of the general manager and the team president? Sandy Alderson could do one of two things. He could do what the owners say, or he could quit and make the decisions that he wants to make for a different organization, assuming he gets another job once he leaves. Which, by the way, he is getting up there in age a little bit, but if he wanted a job, I'm sure somebody would hire him. So now you're looking at fans, and in some cases people in the media, that are having some frustrations that are just, I think they're misdirected. And that's what the problem is. The misdirection of the frustration, it really should be directed at the owners, but instead some of it's being directed to the general manager. And in some cases, other parts of the frustration is being directed at the manager. And listen, it won't be long before people are saying, fire Mickey Callaway. Every other manager in Mets history has had an outcry of a fan base that has wanted them fired. You don't believe me? Look back at Bobby Valentine. There were people in New York sports talk that were screaming for the Mets to fire Bobby Valentine. And when they were struggling in September and it looked like they were going to miss out on the playoff spot or a wild card spot, they said, hey, the Mets missed the playoffs. This guy's out of here. Well, they won the play-in game against the Cincinnati Reds and made a nice run in the postseason to Game 6 of the National League Championship Series the next year. Made it to the World Series. So after that, there was no more people crying or screaming for the firing of the Mets manager. Once again, and I've said this before, I said this on Game Over while I was on WCTC. I'm going to continue to make this point. I don't think it's the most intelligent comment when something doesn't go right and you blame a manager in baseball. And I'm not going to go as far as I did when I said it's a sign of a lack of baseball intelligence. But I do believe somewhat in that statement. That if you understand the operations of a baseball team, the baseball hierarchy, as it is different from that of professional football, professional basketball, and professional hockey, you understand that it's not as much of a forum to blame the manager as it is to blame, in some cases, the front office, most cases, the players, sometimes the ownership, and sometimes the scouting department. How much power does a major league manager in baseball have? nowhere near as much as they even had 5 years ago. Certainly not as much as they had 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. In the days of Billy Martin and Dick Williams and Earl Weaver and Sparky Anderson and Danny Murtaugh and Casey Stengel. These were legitimate baseball minds that were hired with the thought of potentially changing the performance of a team. You're hiring a manager right now, and you're hiring a cheerleader. You're hiring a therapist. You're hiring a guidance counselor. You're hiring somebody that main job is to be there for his players, to be a leader of a social group, as opposed to leading a baseball team. And it's changed. So I think once we've gone that route, and I think once it's been accepted in baseball that these decisions have been made, and this is the way a Major League Baseball manager is supposed to, is accepted now, we need to take that cutthroat approach away when it comes to blaming them for every little thing that doesn't go right on a baseball field. These are professional ball players. So if it's a consistent series of mental mistakes, then maybe you could question why whether the manager has them ready to play. But if it's a matter of a ball going down the right field line because the defense was shifted the other way and there was nobody playing, anywhere close to the ball, you can't blame the manager for that. If a pitcher is taken out after 4 innings and 80 pitches because the organizational philosophy is not to allow the starting pitcher to face a batting order for the 3rd time through, you don't blame the manager, you blame the front office. So I hope we're getting somewhere with that. But to make a longer answer to the question that I asked when we started the show, how much with the New York Mets and their franchise, the way it's run, should the blame even be passed on to the general manager right now? I think it's easy to do. As fans, you're frustrated. I get it. You're upset. The team was in the World Series in 2015. Came a couple breaks away from having a chance to win that World Series. The next year, you made it to the 9th inning of the National League wildcard game against the San Francisco Giants. A break goes your way, you move on, you play the Cubs, and you never know what happens. Last year was a lost season, I get it. But I think it's time to make sure you properly direct the source of your frustration where it belongs. I told you the value of a manager is extremely overrated. The value of the general manager, in this case with the New York Mets, his hands are tied. So you may be suggesting a third possibility. When I mentioned before, he has the choice of either listening to the ownership when they tell him not to spend money, quitting the job and going to do it somewhere else, or deciding that he's going to make those decisions regardless of whether he gets the approval of the ownership. I don't think the third possibility is realistic. And if you're thinking about it from a realistic point of view, I don't think it's a move you would make either. Especially if you wanted your job. I mean, think about it. Whatever it is that you do for a living, if one of your options was to do the exact opposite of what you're told to do, it wouldn't bode well for your career. And unless you had decided that you wanted to go do something else with your life, or you thought you were on your way out anyway, you wouldn't even think about making that kind of decision. Sandy Alderson just signed a contract extension with the New York Mets. So I'm going to assume here that he expects to be here for a little while. He wants to be the Mets general manager for a little while. So in that regard, I would seriously doubt that he would consider making whatever moves that he wants without the approval of his ownership. So once we've eliminated that possibility, we're down to choice one or choice two. Either quit, which is choice two, which, by the way, I already spoke about. If he didn't want to be the general manager and president of the New York Mets and didn't consider option three, it probably makes sense that he signed a contract extension, so he wants to be there. So he's not going to walk away. So that leaves only one option for Sandy Alderson to use going forward. And that is, do what the ownership says. And listen, fans are going to eat that alive. They're going to hate hearing that. A Mets fans hearing the general manager is going to listen to the owner. Which, by the way, 29 other general managers and team presidents do the exact same thing. I get it. I understand the frustration. I feel the frustration. As a fan of the New York Mets, I'd like to see them win a World Series before I die. I don't know how possible that is. But we continue to take the anger that exists, the frustration, the hostility, and we keep throwing it at the wrong people. Once again, number one, a manager in Major League Baseball is the most overrated head coaching position in all of sports. Fact. Hit the button after the beep, and I'll give you the automatic rundown of how I came up with that conclusion again. Number two, we understand what the marching orders are from the Mets ownership. And whether it's Fred Wilpon, who's frustrated that the Yankees just traded for Giancarlo Stanton and hates it every time the Yankees make a significant free agent acquisition and add money to their payroll, or it's Jeff Wilpon, which Fred has passed at least part of the ownership of the team down to his son, right? Is it Jeff that's making these decisions? Maybe there's financial issues that are going on, whether it's running all the businesses and talking about how it pertains to the baseball team. Maybe they just don't have the money or are not willing to fork over the money that it takes to run this franchise. The Mets, at the end of last season, went on a spree in regards to trading players. They traded Lucas Duda. They traded Addison Reed. They traded Jay Bruce, Curtis Granderson, and Neil Walker. Now, most of those deals, or the majority of those deals, if not every single one of them, were financially motivated. The Mets got themselves in a position where their total payroll number was considerably less at the end of 2017 than it was at the beginning of 2017. Now, I would think if you total up the amount of home runs that all those guys hit last year, which I'll pop it up in a second, but if you totaled up the amount of home runs that those guys hit last year, it means that they would have a long path ahead of them in regards to trying to replace those home runs. Now, they did get some relief pitching, and maybe one or two of the guys that they traded for in regards to the relievers could put themselves into their bullpen and maybe make an impact in 2018 going forward. Lucas Duda hit 17 home runs. Neil Walker hit 10, so that's 27. Jay Bruce hit 29, so that's 56. Curtis Granderson hit 19, so that's 75. So that's 75 home runs as we hit the halfway point right here in the Pass Ball Show. This is John Pielli, happy to be with you. Brought to you, of course, by johnpielli.com. The number to call in is 732-364-3598. That's 732-364-3598. So, talking about 4 players that were traded for primarily salary reasons are now, you're talking about 75 home runs that the Mets, ideally, if they were thinking about putting a competitive team on the field, would have to replace. They hit 224 home runs. You minus those 75, and they will be at, what's that, 49? 149 home runs. So you're looking at about 1/3 of the home runs that the Mets hit all of last season were for players that they traded by the end of August. Now, ideally, if you're looking at putting together a winning team, you would figure they have to supplement that offense from somewhere. But they're not going to be able to do that with $10 million. I would say you're going to put a player like a Jay Bruce type, maybe about $15, $18 million a season, which, by the way, is over that $10 million budget, plus another player that you may say, hey, can very quietly hit 20 to 25 home runs, like a Mark Reynolds type, like maybe even a Lucas Duda coming back, or a Logan Morrison. What does that cost? I don't know, maybe $5 to $7 million a season, maybe $10 million. But once again, that's over the budget that you're saying $10 million more to fill out the rest of your ball club. The bottom line, and I'm going to put this conversation and discussion to a close. If you are a frustrated New York Mets fan, you need to put the blame where it belongs, and that's on the owners. And I think Fred and Jeff Wilpon, at some point, have to come to an understanding and make a decision whether they have the ability to own and run a baseball franchise in the city of New York in the year of what will now be 2018. Because while Fred Wilpon and Nelson Doubleday were probably in a good spot to run a New York franchise in 1980, they may not have that same ability to do it right now. And I think they should make that decision. They should be very serious about the thought process that comes down to this. And I'm not saying it from a bitter fan that says sell the team. I'm saying it from a business perspective of trying to figure out what it is that's working. Because when Fred Wilpon and Nelson Doubleday bought the Mets in 1980, baseball had just started free agency. We were looking at the first $1 million contract. And when I mean $1 million, it was the entire term of the contract, which was a 3 or 4 year contract for $1 million. It's probably safe to say about 65-70% of all players in Major League Baseball right now make at least $1 million a year. And I always make that reference to Rookie of the Year. And I love my sports movies, particularly love my baseball movies. So if you've listened to the Past Ball Show for a while, you'll hear me throw movie references in there. But, you know, when the owner of the Chicago Cubs in Rookie of the Year asks for, hey, let me get 4 hot dogs, and he goes to buy the 4 hot dogs with a single dollar bill. That's happened to the Wilpons. Unfortunately, they were involved in a Ponzi scheme, whether they knew about it or didn't know about it. Either they knew about it or they were victimized by the criminal actions of Bernie Madoff. I would think over time they still are feeling repercussions from that. And you know what? Many people come through bad breaks. Remember when I started the show talking about today? 2017 is a bad year for a lot of people. At some point, you got to make decisions based off of that. If the Wilpons do not have the financial ability to put together a good enough team and pay the players accordingly to compete, number one, in the market of New York, but number two, in the market of the upper echelon of Major League Baseball teams. If they don't have that, then they should consider selling. They have a general manager and team president right now in Sandy Alderson, who I don't think is going to spend outrageously. I don't think he's going to go nuts. He's not going to, add $100 million to the current payroll where it is right now. But I'm sure he could use a little more flexibility. And if it was up to him, I have reason to believe that he would address right field and second base, add another reliever and maybe a pitcher. And I said before that I'm not ruling out the possibility of doing that because maybe the field has come down to the Mets. Maybe there won't be as much spending. And the cost of some players, which may seem to be so high and astronomical right now, could very well drop to a point where the Mets could have the ability to involve themselves. So I think it's something worth considering. But my message to Mets fans, if you're looking for somebody to blame, don't blame the manager. Don't blame the general manager. Blame the owners. And I don't know how you get back at the owners. Am I telling you to not buy merchandise? To not go to games? If you're a fan of any sports team, it's sacrilegious to say not to support your team. And you know what? If you go to baseball games, you should still continue to go. And all I'd say, maybe the only thing you can do is write. You want to put together a petition, that's fine. I don't know if it's going to work. But if you're also a fan of the New York Football Giants, you'll find an organization that does a very good job at that. The owners reach out and they care about what their fans have to say. We're going to put this show on hold for 1 second. Once again, John Pielli back with you. Sorry about that. But we were talking about the ownership to the general manager, to the field manager, to the players. And the bottom line is that when you have an owner that you're not happy with the way the team is going, and we've determined that the owners are the ones that are responsible for what's going on, you should, as a fan, let that owner know. And I was talking about the New York Giants, how the Maras, going back to Wellington and now on to John Mara and Steve Tisch. They receive thousands of letters a day from their fans, from their season ticket holders, from people that are passionate. And you know what? Some of the letters may go right in the garbage. But other letters and the sentiment of those letters are taken to heart. Because you know what? The Giants owners want their fans to be happy. And they understand from a business standpoint, happy fans mean more money in their pockets. So all I could suggest to a frustrated Mets fan, outside of stop blaming the manager, and in this case stop blaming the general manager because his hands are tied, write letters. Let the owners know that you're frustrated with their way that they're running the team. Baseball has changed. New York is a major media market. The Mets have a major television contract. they're in a position where they should be able to sustain a higher payroll than what they have. Once again, John Pielli, Pass Ball Show, 732-364-3598. Get you right up here if you want. Last thing we're going to talk about today, the use of amphetamines in Major League Baseball. And this is something that I talked about yesterday. I thought off the air after the show, we had some very good discussions. There were some people that were on board with me, said, you know what, John, you make some good points. What makes an amphetamine not a steroid, or at the very least, not a performance enhancer? Some people say, hey, amphetamines, steroids, they couldn't be any different. Amphetamines and greenies, as we call them, and called them in the 70s and 80s, and I claimed for many, many years before, is a stimulant. It's speed. You're putting something in your system that's moving up your metabolism, and in doing that, puts you at a position where mentally you may feel you have more of an ability to do something than if you were not on the particular drug. Am I saying that it is a steroid? No. Steroids, I think, are taking that to the next level. They're making your heart rate move, first of all, but your muscle mass grows, and you operate at the strength of many times more than that of what you were before that. What is worse? Somebody on steroids or somebody on amphetamines? The answer is obviously somebody on steroids. But baseball has for years included something that's called gamesmanship. Gamesmanship could be the hidden ball trick. It could be the use of some substance to put on a ball and make it move in a different way. It can be a different alteration to a bat or a fielding glove or any type of equipment that gives you an advantage over somebody else. The bottom line is baseball was always created as a group of one men against a group of another men, and they were going to scrap and claw and do everything they could to win the game. Years before there was any proof that steroids were involved in Major League Baseball, there was amphetamines. And they can be traced to the latter parts of the 1930s. There were rumors that Ted Williams and Mickey Mantle used amphetamines. In fact, there is urban legend, which almost has been proven a fact, that the reason Mickey Mantle's season in 1961 ended was because he took an injection from a quack doctor of a substance that contained amphetamines and steroids to better give him a chance at going after Babe Ruth's home run record. It obviously had an adverse effect, cost him the rest of the season, and of course Roger Maris ended up with the all-time home run record for the season. But imagine if the injection held for Mickey Mantle. You're talking about a player that would have been under the use of amphetamines and steroids that may have broken a home run record in 1961. Imagine a news story if that was today. Problem is that there are many great players that have already admitted to using amphetamines. In fact, there are many players that'll talk about the use of amphetamines like they're not a big deal. And you know what? Baseball didn't care for years. They weren't breaking any laws. I told you yesterday, that's the reason that Cal Ripken got to play in all those consecutive games. What's happened in a game today? Very few players play 162 games. And the ones that do, they need a breather here and there. Certainly in no way the same pace year upon year when you had players that just took pride in playing every single game. They can't do that anymore because there's no amphetamines. Mike Schmidt, Goose Gossage, Willie Stargell, Willie Mays, possibly even Hank Aaron. Doesn't mean that any of these players were bad people. Doesn't mean that they don't belong in the Hall of Fame. But what I'm talking about here is a little bit of a hypocrisy. Amphetamines enhanced performance. They did. There's no doubt about that. Did they enhance them at the same rate as somebody injecting themselves with a horse stimulant? Or something that's made to, make a horse jump its legs up in the air and go, Rawr! No. But they still enhance performance. So when you've got Hall of Famers that are speaking out against people that are using steroids, they're saying, yes, oh, by the way, I used amphetamines for my entire career. There's more similarities between the two that we're given credit for. Are we talking about the same exact thing? The answer is no. And I'm not trying to say that steroids are amphetamines or amphetamines are steroids. Problem is, we can't separate the two. Because now we have players that are playing right now in Major League Baseball that if they don't get that doctor's note that says because of ADHD or whatever other reason they need to be subscribed some sort of amphetamine, they're getting suspended. They're losing money out of their pockets. And they're losing time in their baseball careers that players that played in generations before them had the opportunity to do legally, and do legally without any sort of repercussion. Now understand how the same frustration exists for players in this generation. Players in this generation are probably pissed off about the players that played in the late 80s and the 90s and the early part of 2000s. Players that got away, in some cases, with using performance-enhancing drugs. Even the ones that got caught or cited and are being held out of baseball's Hall of Fame because of the use of steroids still got to make millions upon millions upon millions of dollars. Players that play now understand that they don't have those same advantages. They can't do anything artificial to make themselves money. Or if they do, they got to be, number one, very discreet about it. Number two, they got to find a chemist that's ahead of the curve. And I really believe that there is a chemist somewhere out there that's creating performance-enhancing supplements that are allowing players to play and not have to worry about failing a drug test. But that's neither here nor there. My issue is amphetamines because they were in baseball and accepted for such a long time. And I want to grab, if somebody can help me out, because I've been looking for this as part of my research. I want a list of the Hall of Famers that used amphetamines. Now, if we're talking about steroids and players that are in the Hall of Fame, I would say there's a couple. But I think it's more subjective. If players, and I would interview and I would ask every living Hall of Famer that I speak to, did you use amphetamines when you played? And I'm not going to ask them in an indictive way where I'm going after them or trying to give them a hard time. It's a yes or no question. You know what? It's part of my survey. Either did or you didn't. But I'll find there are probably a lot of Hall of Famers that used amphetamines over the course of their career. And if you want to get into Hall of Fame now in Major League Baseball, you can't use amphetamines. Number one, you're going to jeopardize your career. Number two, you're going to cost yourself time, and you're going to cost yourself money. And number three, the person that doesn't know the difference between steroids and amphetamines is going to label you as a drug cheat when it wasn't even brought up for players that used amphetamines years ago. I'm going to continue to preach this. Obviously, amphetamines aren't good for you. But when we're talking about the war on steroids in professional sports and the war on players getting into the Hall of Fame that use steroids in Major League Baseball, we need to have more discussion about amphetamines. Now, I understand when they're against the law and they're being tested for. You could be a little tougher on somebody that's doing it now. And I'm not saying years ago it was okay. But the problem that I have is that we're deciding that we're still going to applaud all the players that used amphetamines when it's against the law to use amphetamines without a doctor prescription. And number two, it's against the law of Major League Baseball because you're being tested for it. Yet how many players for years upon years made it into its Hall of Fame that used amphetamines for their entire career? You're not going to take those players out, nor should you. But when we're talking about steroids in baseball, I think baseball has done the best job it can to keep them out. But we can't forget about a generation of players that played. We can't forget about what happened between 1987 and 2005 because there was great baseball that was played then. Yes, home run records were broken, both single season and all time. Many players joined the 500 home run club. More players joined the 600 home run club. Another player joined the 700 home run club. That all happened. And whether your thoughts on the players doing steroids or not doing steroids may impact your belief in these numbers, I'll compare it to one thing. And I tell you, I'm not a political person at all. So I'm just saying this as a comparison. Whether you love or hate the president, he is still the president. Whether you love or hate Barry Bonds, he's still hit more home runs than anybody in Major League Baseball history. It's a fact. You may not want to believe it, but it's still a fact. And I've said before, if Barry Bonds is not going to get into the Hall of Fame, I don't want to see any memorabilia in the Hall of Fame that's honoring him. I don't want to see the bat of his 756th home run. I don't want to see the bat of his 71st home run that he hit in 2001. I don't want to see a picture of him with his arm around his dad in the 1980s. If the Hall cannot acknowledge the best players for what they did, then they should have the balls to keep their memories out of the Hall of Fame. And that includes Pete Rose, too. That bat over his 4,191st hit when he broke Ty Cobb's record in 1985. Get it out of the Hall of Fame. If he's not a Hall of Famer, get it out of the Hall of Fame. We'll be back with you tomorrow, 6 p.m., 7 p.m. This is the Passball Show, brought to you by JohnPielli.com. God bless you, and as always, I'll see you on the other side.